welcome back to another episode of An Infinite Deal of Nothing.
Hello.
We've been absent because we've been busy and out of uni, and now uni starts again, so we're actually back in each other's lives.
We are. We still saw each other somewhat a lot.
We did. We just weren't regular enough to plan recordings and do everything that we have to do for this.
This is true, but here we are.
But it's given us time to regroup and recuperate and redesign.
So I think we're going to keep it very casual structure-wise, but we were talking over coffee a couple of weeks ago, and that we kind of want to use a single book as a springboard for an episode. So the discussion might go in various directions, but the starting point is always going to be a book. So that's going to be the basis as per episode. Will be titled probably a book and then some kind of subtitle
of whatever we end up talking about.
So yeah, basically it's book club structure.
Book club structure with whatever we decide to talk about. Yeah. So yeah, if you follow the Instagram, which if you don't and you fancy it, then go and follow the Instagram. Same name. Same name. I didn't say
absolute
shit.
Dog shit.
This week we're starting off strong with Max Porter's Shy. But if you haven't read the book,
I'm very bad at synopsis, but I'll give it a go. A novel consumed in one gulp, very based in like 90s drum and bass music, and very much reads that way, I would say. But essentially following a eponymous character, Shy, who attends Last Chance, which is a school for boys who have been kicked out of school, and this is hence the name, their last chance school, basically, and it's a specialist rehabilitation academy, I guess, for boys who have very much lost their way in life and are trying to get back on track. You follow a range of voices that Shy inhabits and encounters over the period of primarily one day as he is walking to a pond with a rucksack of stones with the intention of suicide, essentially. But it very much flicks back and forwards. There's lots of different voices. There's narrative voices, documentary voices, inner voices. Very much a overstimulating book of lots of voices hitting you at once, I would say. It's
very topical at the minute because there's a movie out in the cinema.
Yeah.
And then officially released on Netflix.
3rd of October. So by the time you see this?
Probably. Yeah, I think so. We're having a little watch party, which is exciting.
Very.
But that follows, rather than Shy, one of the teachers at the school.
Steve.
And also something that was coming to mind while I was reading it, Educating Yorkshire reminds me of it a little bit.
Yeah.
I think because we had a lot of conversations about how that's focusing more on children who are struggling to be within the school environment. And I think that's very fitting for this sort of book.
Definitely.
And mostly focusing on boys.
Yes.
Leads us into sort of the main point of the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, the main point of what we gleaned.
What we gleaned, yeah. The one thing that I think we both took from the book as its primary focus is, you described it as a manosphere.
I think it just kind of reminded me of this kind of like rise of the manosphere that's happening in British secondary schools in particular at the moment, as covered in the likes of adolescence. If you see adolescence, is very much that kind of mindset, I would say.
Yeah. Primary focus to me is taking that in its stride and considering how young boys are losing their own sort of identity from a very young age to the expectations of other boys around them. And it's sort of this really toxic cycle where a boy is sort of dragged into this lifestyle or these expectations, and then he continues to reinforce those expectations on those other people around him despite suffering the repercussions of those expectations. And I think that's something that this book really handles really interestingly.
Yeah, so it's basically an echo chamber.
Yes, an echo chamber.
Well, I think the way the book is structured and organised very much reflects that idea of an echo chamber, as we were saying.
Yeah, like you say, there's multiple voices at play throughout the whole book.
Yeah.
And Max Porter very interestingly plays along with typography in one of his books. And we had a discussion about what each voice is.
Yeah.
Because I think that it's quite interesting that obviously we as a reader lose that vocal side of those voices, so we have to sort of try and identify what is what and what tone is being used for each voice. I think that also adds to it in a way, because I think one thing about an echo chamber, and I mean, you've probably experienced it as well. When you're remembering things that people have said to you, tone can get lost in that, and you can take things a lot differently to different people. So I think, especially as a young growing child, you know, tone is very important. And I think even when you're trying to remember things, it can get discombobulated.
But I mean, what I was saying to you before, you finished it literally like, what, half an hour ago?
Yeah.
I haven't read this since it came out, which is maybe like a year and a half, 2 years ago now. But I always dip into Max Porter's books anyway, and it's been on my mind, I think, since I've read it, and at the time what it really highlighted for me, and I've been trying to think of a way to put this, I don't want to sound like a cretin, basically, but if you just hear me out on it, I think what it really highlighted for me is that in the very complicated culture and discourse that we have at the moment about gender rights, men, women, and there's a lot of things that would go around unnoticed by, say, like myself. A typical phrase is like, oh God, I hate men.
Yeah.
This kind of phrase, which there's been a historic and still current continuous relentless oppression towards women. So it's very evident, and I don't think there's anything wrong for me personally with that kind of, I know, with them kinds of phrases. However, when it comes to the young boys, like those in Shy, particularly even younger boys, they now have access to social media from a very young age. Whether, you know, they should or they shouldn't is down to opinion, but the truth of the matter is that 9 times out of 10 they do. I mean, that's a whole other issue in itself. But 9 times out of 10 they do have access to social media, and they do hear phrases like this. They are part of this
extremist phrases.
Yeah, extremist phrases that can just be thrown around. But I think it's because, you know, younger boys who might not have that understanding take that very much as and I think from that young age you're being told being like a man and being a boy is something to be ashamed of. And you're part of this like clan of people that want to like ruin the opposite sex, basically, which is obviously not the case, and it's obviously not the message that's trying to be portrayed. But it all comes down to how things are perceived and received through the likes of social media, when everything can become so convoluted. And I think that's what, roundabout to say, I think that's what this book gets at really well. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely it does. Bit of tiptoeing there.
There's a lot of tiptoeing.
Lot of tiptoeing. That was like a...
How I said it to you before was much more direct.
Yeah, that was like a... Erica, please say it because it won't come across as me being anti-feminist if you say it. That's what that point was.
Yeah.
To summarise Oliver's convoluted point there, is it's focusing on the male perspective of the current sort of divide in genders.
Yes.
And that's something that is forgotten about because men are very easily put as the predators and the evil people.
Which statistically they fucking are.
But they're also forgetting about the innocent children that haven't necessarily done anything wrong yet that are sort of being pushed into that. Yeah,
and it's not a helpful or healthy discourse to have. No. I don't think about anybody, you know, no matter what. So, but that comes down to your personal beliefs.
It almost starts feeling like, I can imagine, for young men, they get defensive. Like, oh, so you hate me, so I'm just going to fucking hate you about that. And I think that that's sort of what this book takes from Shy. He is very defensive of his own sort of self. And I think rather than saying, oh, I accept myself for who I am, so I don't care what you're saying about me, he goes, I can say better than that. Like, oh, you think my hair sucks? Oh, well, your mum's fat. And that argument happens countless times throughout the book. There's countless moments where Shy has said, someone says something to Shy and he's like, yeah, well, I can say something worse to you. And I think that that's sort of the feeling that they get because they're being backed into the corner of their villains. And I think that the only thing that they can do then is just shout back. And I think that that's something this book explores. Obviously, that's not an experience for every man. Obviously, that's not an experience felt by everyone, but it's an experience that happens nonetheless. And I think that's just something this book brings to light.
Yeah, I like that about being backed into a corner as well. That's summarised. And I think the whole book for me, just all I can hear, I mean, again, it's just my interpretation, but all I can hear Max Porter like shouting to the world when I read this book is, don't forget about these people.
Yeah.
And I think ultimately the reason these characters are in this state is because they've been forgotten about.
Yeah, and I think it's not even necessarily about forgetting, but maybe
pushed to the side.
Yeah, I think also, but it's the idea of this is what you see on the outside. You see on the outside, all the time, Shy's behaviour that he does through the book. You do get sort of outside glimpses a bit of through his mum and how she reacts to those things, and through his school and how they react to the things that he does. But focusing only on the outside becomes a problem because we're not then considering what's going on the inside. And I think that's a key focus of Max Porter's book is, yes, you see all this behaviour, and yes, this behaviour is awful and bad and stuff, but there's obviously reasons why this behaviour is happening, and we're not taking that into consideration because we're just saying, oh, well, this person has ADHD, so they're going to do it, or this person has bad trauma, so they're going to do it, or this person, is a boy, so he's going to do it. It's a classic boys will be boys.
I was literally about to say that, yeah.
Saying boys will be boys minimises so much.
Yeah.
And obviously we obviously focus on the fact that it minimises female experiences because it's saying, oh, well, a boy's going to do that. Boys will be boys. And that's tends to be the context that we focus on it on. But I think this book says, yes, boys will be boys, but let's focus it on the other context of we're now just expecting boys to behave like that, and we're not understanding why they're feeling like they have to behave like that. And I think that's the expectations that phrase puts on boys as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that being said, one thing that I think really summarises this book as well is this one little paragraph here.
Okay.
So, is it ever exhausting being you is a really key phrase, I think. But it goes on with, his thoughts are lopping along in odd repetitive chunks, running at him, stumbling. Feels brave, feels pathetic, feels nothing. Panic, calm, mad, clatter in the roof of the brake like machine guns, then swirling calm. That's like a perfect summary of what this book is like. It's running thoughts, moving forward, moving backwards. Yeah. One other interesting thing that we'll go on to talk about as well is Shy is constantly in purgatory throughout this whole book. And it's shown in so many different ways. Yeah. In that he's constantly moving forward, he's constantly moving back. And then when he gets that middle ground where nothing's happening, he panics and he freaks out. And that's where a lot of the problems come from. He can't work out if he wants to be alive, he can't work out if he wants to be dead. And I just think that middle ground is also something really interesting that we'll probably discuss a bit more.
Feels like he's kind of suspended in this...
Suspended is the perfect word.
Suspended, like a continuous state of uncertainty, both about what he wants, but he's also so lost and uncertain with regards to what people want from him and why the society expects from him. But he's like, what do my parents want from me? What does this last chance school want from me? What do the people filming this documentary want from me?
What do my friends want from me?
What do my friends want from me? And I think that is a really interesting part of this book, is the idea of the documentary.
Yeah, because it's easily forgotten about.
Yeah, and there's this whole like kind of subplot, I guess, woven through where you have this filming crew coming to the last chance school to essentially record a documentary about the goings on of the school and the issues that...
And then it might be shutting soon.
And then it might be shutting soon.
Uncertainty.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that's a really kind of powerful device as well, because it's without breaking the isolation and solitude of, and like the intimacy and tightness of the narrative in the book, it's still managing to bring this kind of outside perspective and question, what does the world see when it looks at a school like this? Yeah. So you're hearing so much, when that's juxtaposed as well. So you've got all of Shy's thoughts, all of these voices, and then you just got this one narrative from this outside voice, this outside perspective that's seeing it as a whole, out of the context of all of the staff in the school. Yeah, the juxtaposition of those two things being put together, I think, is really powerful, because the documentary narration has this really strong sense of alienation to it. Yeah. It's so detached, it's so clinical, and it's so demeaning, I think, to the students and to the staff as well. Yeah.
The documentary is the perfect example of seeing what's going on the outside while forgetting what's going on the inside. Yeah. And I think the documentary is to sort of embody that view, and that's the majority view, I suppose. Unless you're someone connected to it, unless you are one of the people in there, you're not going to be thinking about what's going on the inside. And it dehumanises everyone.
I kind of pitched it as a snow globe. You have the last chance in this kind of snow globe and all the characters in this snow globe, and then you have the people recording this documentary, which kind of just represents wider society in their view, kind of tapping on the glass and being like, what are these specimens doing in here? It's almost, they don't see them as a part of their own society. It's like their own separate kind of commune. And I just think it's intensely sad.
Let's then focus on Shy's loss of identity as a part of his boyhood as our first sort of main point. I think the most poignant way that we see this from the book is his love of music and sort of the arts in general, which he clings to in certain ways and pushes away in others. Because he's constantly at risk of, judgment from the people around him. And I think one key thing that this book focuses on in terms of boyhood is that loss of identity, because you're so scared of other people's opinions of you. How loud some boys seem to be about that.
Oh God, yeah. Well, then you've also got these passages where he's just alone with his thoughts in this flashback and his drum and bass music in his Walkman. Typographically speaking, you get these blocks of text, almost just like walls. And you look at a block of text and think, oh God, here we go.
Yeah.
But what I find with them, and I'm saying this to you, is they have such a pace to them, and your eyes can glide from line to line to line to line to line. I think it's very apparent as well, because I was watching an interview and it actually turned out that those passages, Max Porter said he actually wrote them while listening to loud drum and bass music, like through his headphones. And that's, I think, why they've got such a rhythm and a pace.
Yeah. Shy loses so much of his identity, and he's aware of it. There's so many instances where he says, oh, I'm pretending I don't like this, and that sucks. That really sucks for me, and I really wish I wasn't doing that, but I'm too conscious of, how other people would perceive me. And he's also aware that if another person was doing that, he'd be like, you're a weirdo. Like, oh, you like ballet, you weirdo. But, he might share. I think there is a line like that, I can't find it right now. I think the same with violence as well. There's so many instances throughout the book where Shy is so reluctant to commit violence. But all the other boys around him are doing it. And it almost becomes an expectation of, oh, I've got to do it as well then.
Yeah.
Like a really good example is the fight scene where...
Towards the start.
Yeah, he's with his cousin, Sean. Yeah, so he's keen to stop getting himself in these situations where he wants to turn back the last half hour, but also kind of glad to be here again. He takes a glass beer bottle from the full bin beside him, smashes the neck off on the bench and swings as hard as he can at the chatty lad banging on about tumble tots and opens the line straight across the top of the kid's forehead. And he thinks, wow, so easy. And he thinks, oops, now I'm in proper trouble. And he sits down on the bench and covers his ears.
There's so many moments where you have the violence, the violent thought, and then it flips and you realise that he's a child. It's this kind of like impulse that he has that he doesn't seem to be able to control.
And there's so much empathy that you can have for Shy because he is a child, and I think Mike Porter does a very good job at making you remember that at the end of the day, he's just a boy.
Yeah.
That is very lost, slightly confused, even though he denies that he's actually a bit in the book. But, he's lost himself entirely. There's nothing to him other than violence and panic. When he doesn't know what to do, he flashes. He acknowledges he doesn't want to do it, and then after he's done it, he's feeling bad about himself.
It's just that end, it's a perpetual cycle, isn't it? That
yes.
I think it's so common in youths like him. Youths like him, that you do just kind of get trapped in the cycle of violence, regret. The whole point of Last Chance is to try and break that cycle.
Yeah.
And I think where it really comes to a head is the end, where you've got this huge kind of crescendo. It really is like literally is an explosion at the end. And I think reading the book then, or thinking about the book retrospectively from that, knowing how it ends, it really does actually build very gradually.
Yeah.
But I think you have to have read the end of it to then go back and see that gradual build, which is very clever. Very clever.
I think the gradual build is interesting and sort of emulates that idea that, he had an identity to begin with, and it's growing up and meeting more people and being around people his age that's made him gradually grow to become what he's become. And I think that's really shown in the bit where we get to talk about the VHS tapes.
Yeah.
From when he was younger, and you see him really just be a little kid that was absolutely adored his mum, adored his stepdad, and then the flip is so sudden, and it's that childishness just ripped from him.
Yeah. Well, it's the whole, goes back to the whole loss of innocence.
It did. It is the loss of innocence, and
But it's innocence pulled from underneath you rather than a gradual loss or a self-inflicted loss. What did you make of it formally then? Max Porter is known for being very playful with form and not disregarding the rules, but doing with the words what he thinks is required in order to deliver the message that he wants to.
well, one thing I did say to you, I think Max Porter captures humanism, not that that's a word, but human, like, mannerisms and sort of what it is to be a human, the way that you do things, the way that you think, the way you talk, really well. And I think his form lends to that. You know, nothing, especially when you're in a state that shy, nothing is chronological, nothing. It's one after the other, nothing.
That's a good point.
Is sentence to sentence. It's very jumpy and I think it's his form that allows him to do so much of what he managed to do in this book. And I think it's his form that really elevates the torment and juxtaposition that grows within inside of his character. As in the form itself and how it's sort of presented on the page. Very interesting, especially because I actually haven't read a book like that before.
Okay.
I think you're definitely more... Again, this comes into me reading more modern books.
Yeah.
And we sort of had a brief conversation about this the other day. In reading more modern books that you've been recommending to me, I'm having to get used to a lot. And I think it's almost like, I suppose the only equivalent I can give is if you were to go and read a classic book and it has like 4 pages of exposition and 2 pages about landscapes. You know, people always says like, oh, that's like the worst part about reading classic books because, you know, they can go on so long about landscapes and stuff. To me, that's natural. Like, to me, like, if I was to write a book, I'd probably write it like that. And that's how I grew up writing books. But going into reading more modern books, and something that I really enjoy about Max Porter is he's not afraid to play with form, but it takes me a while to get into it. Like you said to me yesterday, you were shocked that I put the book down because you thought you described it as a gulp today. I can understand why it would be, and I can understand that rhythm comes into it. But I think for a while, especially when I was first getting into reading the book, it took me a while to get that rhythm because I was just sort of like overwhelmed. Yeah, I was jarred. I was like, oh, okay, we're jumping again. Oh, okay. And I'm not a pretentious, this has to be, you know, sentence to sentence. But because I'm so used to that, it took me a while to get used to that.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed it, and I think his form elevates what his books tend to talk about.
Yeah. I do love the defiance of him using the term novel.
Yes.
I've talked about this before, but Grief is a Thing with Feathers, Shy, Lanny, like they're all... Lanny still plays with form, but it's probably his most traditional, quote-unquote, novel. But Grief is a Thing with Feathers, it's very sparse, very kind of line-breaky, poetic, shaped, jumpy, and I just love the defiance of calling it a novel.
Yeah.
Especially when people have got all these like kind of grand ideas of what the novel is and what the great novel is, and I just think like, fuck off.
If you're going to deal with the subject matter that he's dealing with, and I think if you're going to focus so heavily on inner monologue, there isn't another way to do it. I think if you did prose, paragraphy, novelly, traditionally, it would limit. I think it would work, but I think it would limit. I don't think it'd capture the chaos as well.
No, it couldn't be as erratic.
No, and I think that wouldn't be the same book.
I think when you really get the essence of this book, if you haven't done so already, highly recommend you look on YouTube, go and watch like a reading that he does, because you think, oh, it's just another author reading from their book, that's boring. Because often when you go to a literary event, that is like the most boring part, when they just sit in like read an extract in the most boring way possible. We've all either read the book or are going to read the book, so if you're going to read it, you know, give it a bit of When Max Porter does readings, it is a performance, and you can really see why he writes in this way, because he obviously thinks in this way.
Yes.
That's what his inner voice is. He's telling the story how he wants to when he speaks it aloud, and I think he's just translating that as accurately as possible onto the page. And when you hear him read, you can very much tell that. It's really, really moving. There's this whole collaboration he did with I think he was a bass player who used a lot of like distortion and warping sounds.
Okay.
And it was a collaboration they did, and it was about a 30-minute reading. And then he just went and sat down and did a normal interview, which seemed completely ridiculous. It was an extended reading of this book.
Yeah.
And it was so moody and the atmosphere was so thick.
Yeah.
And he was so into it. And I think having watched that and revisiting any of his work, it's just such a key part of what he does, I think. Okay, so there's an extract that I was particularly struck by and always remember when I think about the book. It's another, if you're watching, it's another block text section, essentially about him waking up in this nightmare. You've got, I guess, the present in the school, and you've got him walking to / being in the pond.
Yeah.
And those are the two like distinct parts of the book for me. Obviously there's other things that constitute each half, but those are the two distinct halves. And this is the passage, I think, where those two things really come together. You have the mixture of his home life, and then you have this pond, this suicide attempt, basically. I struggle to know where to stop with these sections because they just don't seem to stop until you reach the end, but just to give you a taste. When he woke up twice in his nightmare last week, he'd gone down to the pond and walked in over his head, eyes open. But every time he tried to lie down, the second his weight was on the bottom of the pond, someone would reach in and yank him out, lift him by his hair, hoiked up, gasping to the top, which is the attic bathroom. Under the surface calm, ripped up, pulled hair, back to the bathroom, graffiti on the beam. Under the surface alarm, metal pipe running right through him, a naked woman, half Amanda, half stranger, pegging it around and around and around the pond faster than a human can run, like a sped up video, bathroom, back under, making a noise like the foxes shagging at night, Barb dicks howling, wash up out of the pond, back into the bathroom, carved beam laughing, etc, etc,
etc, etc.
and it just goes on and on and on and on and on, and it's just like relentless merging of images and merging of two worlds, which I think is just captured so amazingly, so I just wanted to share.
Which also actually dives me into the point that I had just remembered that we spoke about.
Okay.
Shy being in the middle, in like the purgatory, in the suspended state that he seems to be in for anymore. Obviously we see him on this journey on his way to slip and sliding into the pond, to making that final decision of where he wants to be between life and death. But I think it sort of comes to a head with the badgers in the pond.
I think in that moment when he decided to investigate what the badgers were, he'd made the decision.
It was a reason for him to not follow through, and it was a fabricated reason. Like, did he really get?
No, he was looking for a reason, which in my mind makes me think that he'd already decided.
Yeah.
But it was more he felt he had to, or he was obliged to, or that's what people wanted him to do. It goes back to that thing of expectation and what these young men think the world thinks of them. He obviously had this impression that the world thought so little of him that the world didn't want him. Do you know what, you mentioned Educating Yorkshire before, and there was a bit in an episode a couple of weeks ago where the kid goes, I think he's like a year 7 or 8 kid, and he goes, well, I know you don't want me here anyway. I just think that's like the most depressing thing ever. To be young and to have that genuine belief that you are not wanted in a place. And I think ultimately that's what drives Shy to this point. But it's the thought of life, it's the thought of badgers that brings him back from that decision. I
think another interesting thought that he had in that moment was he seems to get annoyed at the thought that someone had done this to the badgers. That it wasn't like just, the circle of life.
Yeah.
It was that someone had violently done something to the badgers, and it really set him off, like this idea. And it comes back to the Shy not particularly enjoying violence, even though he's
so wrapped up in it.
And I think that that's a really foundational point, is that Shy is wrapped up in things that he doesn't want to be wrapped up in.
I also don't think he understands how he is reached that point.
No, absolutely. And that's where the purgatory comes from, because he's moving out of that and then coming back into it constantly. Like, you see moments of sort of clarity where he's like, don't like it, I don't like talking to my mum that way, just want to be who I know I am. There's aspects of myself that I like enough that I want to sort of bring to my forefront. And then he takes a step back again and he implodes, and it's just that fight between those two things, because it's almost like he reaches that middle of, I know I want to do this, but I don't know how to get there, and I don't know how I've gotten here where I am now. And I think that's what's pulling him constantly throughout the book. It's the two opposing forces that just keep hitting him. Yeah, I think one thing that really embodies those two opposing forces, we spoke about what we thought the bold text was. And you had initially thought it was a therapist from school. I had initially thought it might have been the inside thought of him. Upon finishing the book, I think it might have been like people from his original school. All the schools he's been kicked out from. And I think that's a really interesting pulling back force.
Because the voice changed, didn't it?
The voice constantly changes who's talking to him, whether it's students or teachers from the schools that he's been kicked out of. They're the voices that are pulling him back. The voices that are pulling him forwards are the teachers at this new school, the teachers, the therapists, and the people that are giving him the time to try and get to him where he wants to go. And I think that they're the two opposing forces, and they're what's sort of driving the sort of inner workings of Shy. Key cause of the purgatory is school.
There you go.
Solid fun, solid episode back.
Yeah, nice to be back nattering.
Back nattering.
What is next week's book?
What is next week's book? Oh, we're focusing on the Booker Prize.
Yes, we have a highlight on the Booker Prize shortlist to share.
Obviously, you've read a few off the Booker Prize.
I have.
I've not read any, and we've heard many mixed thoughts. This is shortlist.
Yeah,
Booker Prize shortlist. I'm not ready off the shortlist. He's read a few on the shortlist.
Yeah, read a couple.
Yeah, I read a couple on the shortlist, so I'm going to get to reading them. We're going to give our opinions, see which one we're rooting for.
Yeah.
And then we'll document the winning. We'll also probably let you know our thoughts on Steve.
Yes, we'll have that as a little cameo next week's episode. So what to be fan as the book for next week?
The Land in Winter.
Because we both own that now.
Yes, The Land in Winter.
So we're looking at Andrew Miller's, iconic author, Andrew Miller's The Land in Winter next week.
Yeah, book a shortlist.
Well, thank you very much for listening to us ramble as always.
If you made it this far.
I thought you were going to follow up with something else then. But yeah, thank you very much for listening as always, and we will see you very soon.
Yes. See you next week.
Bye.